Peace party people, Kyle Murdock, Harvey Newman for the players, brought to you by Proxima Studios. We're back once again, and we decided to change it up something. I'm always like pitching Harvey some really cool, I think they're cool ideas. A lot of it is selfishly because I want to learn more, about this whole industry. Because again, I probably said every episode, like for me, doing this show and now working in gaming is somewhat new to me. Flipping perspectives as a longtime gamer for 40 years almost of my life, now to be working on games is such a blessing, and it's just been so cool because I've been learning a lot and seeing what I can, port over from my career working more in linear media in audio. But that being said, I wanted to talk to Harvey. I think one time I was like, yo, wouldn't it be just cool if we spent the episode talking about how does a game go from literally a concept or ideation, an idea, into coming ultimately to fruition and everything that goes in between. So that's what we're going to do this episode.
Let's do it.
And no person better to do it than Harvey, because Harvey has worked in games over 20 years at this point and has literally seen, there's an expression we use, soup the nuts, which is basically means how it's kind of stupid, right? But it makes sense, I guess. How do things go from this form to that form?
Right.
So I want to talk about how does a game go in soup to nuts form from, again, an idea to something now you can download on your PlayStation, Switch, Xbox, PC, Steam, whatever. So I guess the first thing is the idea.
Mm-hmm. Where did it come from?
what is it? And do you want to take a specific game you worked on, maybe that you want, or just in general? How do you want to do this?
I'll do it in general.
Okay.
Because every game kind of starts different. It depends on exactly what it is. So there's adaptations of games, as you know. There's also original IP, but then there's also IP taken from TV and movies,
and adapting it
as well.
Right.
That's lots of different ways for you to get different things and get your game to be published, so that your game to be ends up in gamers' hands and stuff.
Right. Ultimately, right.
But the first thing that I would say is that the journey is long, so hence why it's good that this is an hour, because we can. But I think the ideation normally starts it normally starts with the game director or the person that actually kind of has the IP, or somebody pitching something to a studio that actually works well. So I have two different examples. So the first example. Maybe three. The first example will be what CDPR does, CD Projekt Red does with Cyberpunk, right? So they actually obviously read The Witcher, the book series, right, from the author, and they thought this will make a great game. So similar to us with the graphic novel in Warship Jolly Roger.
Yes.
And they thought this will make an amazing game, right? So the studio themselves, they have to pitch themselves to the author to say, we are talented enough and once again, I'm assuming, I don't know this for a fact, I'm just going by what I've seen over 20 years. They have to pitch themselves to the author and then go on to the publisher and then say, we are good enough to make this game and we'd like to hire or loan your IP for a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then the money's changed and stuff, and then they start working on the IP. If everybody actually agrees to actually kind of go ahead and do this, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how that starts. But the idea has been done, right? We had an episode last week with Sylvain, and we talked about creating this world, which is exactly what Sylvain and Mickey did, right? They created this world and the ideation and stuff. So what CD Projekt Red is doing is actually piggyback off that idea and then expanding and making a game out of it, which is not easy because it's incredibly hard, but at least they have something to go from. But then there's actually the original idea. So maybe, let me see. I'm thinking about, BioShock, for example, right?
Okay.
BioShock is a good example. Oh, Fallout, for example.
Oh my God, that's my game.
Exactly. So that is a bit more complicated the way it goes, because the way it goes is that you normally have a bunch of, we call it pre-production. And pre-production is a period of time that a studio is given to basically think about the story, the characters, the world, how would this come together and stuff like that. However, when game studios actually do this, they think about the big scope of the game, and they think about how this will come together, and they think about a million different things. So it's almost like the idea is biased, because you are thinking about, like, if this is going to take a long time or not a long time, how many characters, how many worlds, how many levels and stuff, which to me, it never made sense, because I feel like it defeats the purpose of actually kind of like setting up a good story for a game. So I do think that Fallout and BioShock are good examples, because they actually focused heavily on the narrative first, and then they build the game after. So they basically found ways to tell that story and found ways to gamify this story. So most games, just to kind of like simplify it, start from a story, like character-driven story, something that actually the player can relate to. And even if you go back to the early days, all the games that you kind of related to and enjoyed and stuff, doesn't matter if it's Donkey Kong, Super Mario, or I don't know,
Zelda
or whatever,
Right.
especially Zelda. You play it and you feel it, and you like, it becomes the best game ever for you personally, because you felt for the character, right? Like Final Fantasy, like you feel like that character. You feel like,
oh my God. I
right?
was the first time people said they cried in a video game was when Aerith died, at the hands of Sephiroth. That was
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Like, and every time like Link like goes through this journey that takes you
it's like, how
70
many
hours.
times are you gonna sell to save this woman? Like,
Yeah, exactly. But every time is epic. Every time is different adventure. And by the time you get to the end of the adventure, I feel emotional every single time. I feel like, man, I just did this. I just feel like I want to do it again. It just feels so good. But it starts with a good story. So the games that actually work the best actually have a good story and have a good idea, and you have like a hook that actually makes sense. So the hook is the second biggest part of the game, where what is the game mechanic that is going to sell this? So Link, he has the Master Sword. So like he can use it, and he needs to find it, and he needs to, once he finds it, he becomes this super powerful guy, right? But what are the supporting game mechanics that you can like, get you from point A to Z when it comes to the game? So those things need to be in addition to the story. So the idea and the game mechanics need to come together. And this is before you start making the game. You need to actually ask those two things. And most people that actually know games, when they read a good story of a game or a good pitch for a game, they go, cool, but what are the game mechanics? What is the core game loop of the game?
Right. Okay. And thinking about, I'm thinking about staffing. So pre-production, this is before we even get an engine and all, way before all that stuff. We're like, at this point, we're still just kind of iterating, like writing stuff and sharing ideas. But as far as staff, who are the people who are these first few people that are usually hired onto a project at this point? Would it be the game director and like a narrative director? Like,
that's a great question. That's a brilliant question, because it's almost like, think about it for anybody out there that likes sports. Kyle and I, you enjoying the NBA, right? We've talked about basketball before.
NBA draft was the other night. Yeah.
Absolutely. So think about it like sports, almost like you have the head coach, like for example, JJ Redick just became the coach for the Lakers, and everybody's going like, who's going to staff in order to get the team off the ground and stuff. It's kind of the same thing. So normally the pitching happens most likely with just the game director. There might be a producer there, but mainly producers are there to kind of think about the scope of the game, how much money, like how many people need to be involved in order to fulfill the game, how many years, things like that. And the game director is like the ideas man, right? Like he sells this story and the vibe and stuff. So normally you can have 2 or 3 people. You don't need much to actually get the idea and the core game loop maybe. But then you need to prove those ideas first, right? Before you even get probably money. prove those ideas with basically a playable demo of what we call a lot of the times a vertical slice, which is basically a demonstration, like it's almost like a cake, right? Like a sliver of the cake to showcase.
Right. That's pulled out just to show people. Right.
Exactly. So for that, then you need people, right? But you don't need all the people. You just need a certain
Enough
amount
to make the slice.
to make the slice. Absolutely. So then you have to start to think about what comes first and second. And games is really like the chicken and egg situation where like some people think that certain things come first and some other people think that some other completely different things come first. So the way I like to think about it is that design becomes the most important thing after story, because design needs to gamify the story into a game, right? So designers are very important, and normally they're actually the first ones to do, but there's not only one type of designer, there's multiple type of designers. So there's a game designer, which everybody knows, that's probably what everybody knows, but there's also a level designer, there's a narrative designer, there's so many, there's like so many designers. But normally the game designer and the narrative designer and the level designer, those three are normally the ones that you hire first, because somebody needs to make the levels interesting. Somebody needs to make the narrative that was basically almost book-like, that is interesting when you read it from page to page, needs to fit in the game. So that's why you hire a game narrative designer. And then you also need to actually make sure that, the characters, the background, the mechanics and stuff, they're also interesting. So you have like a what do they call it? It's systems designer is what they call it. So they have to kind of create the systems that actually, once again, going back to the Master Sword, what makes this Master Sword better than other weapons? How do you actually balance all the weapons? How do you actually get the Master Sword to feel and to be the most coveted, most powerful things without breaking the game, without being OP? That's basically what the systems are there for. So that's basically what you start with, designers, but designers, they don't normally, depends. There's designers, they do it, but they don't normally do work in terms of like, they don't actually do the work to put it in engine.
The coding and stuff.
Like the stuff that actually needs, they plan it, right? So they are big good planners. They do like documentation about it would work because of this and stuff like that. And this is what people want to see in the beginning in order to prove the game, right? Like documentation of how these levels would work and examples and other games and other films and stuff. Sometimes designers do a little bit of work. Ultimately, once the studio goes big, and I'm thinking about AAA, they normally just design and other people do the work to actually implement the designs.
Right.
If it's a small studio, indie studio like ourselves, normally the designer does do the work, does the implementation.
Right.
So, for example, a level designer would have to actually go in and model the level and make sure that the pathing is correct and make sure that, it's not boring and is interesting and there's things and, I don't know, traps and stuff. That's basically how it is.
So many. I mean, it's just like, and we have barely scratched the surface, and already it's just. I just think that a lot of people I know for a fact, a lot of people do take for granted. Again, we talked about this when people are just like, why does it take 4 years for this to come out? Dude, we haven't even done anything in the game yet.
We're just talking and thinking about the game. That's it.
And how long do you think this pre-production, how long does that usually last? Like, have we officially started, would you say, the dev cycle of a game at this point? Like the pre-production, I mean, obviously is an important part, but does this count in when people start counting like the whatever X years, amount of years that it takes? This factors in, right? And if so, how long does this usually happen?
Yeah, so it depends on the game. Some games, they actually have to factor the pre-production and production of the game together. But most games, they actually see pre-production as basically that money comes out of our pocket, as in the studio, because you need to invest in order to sell the game and the vertical slice and stuff. So at the end of the pre-production, not normally, but it depends on the studio. But most studios that have not proven themselves, so perhaps they actually are like have only a few games down, stored in, they still need to do a vertical slice to prove themselves that this game is going to be good. But if you are a Naughty Dog or like a Guerrilla Games or whatever that has proven themselves over and over again, you can just have a sheet of paper saying this is going to be the next game that we want want to do. And then
Where's
people,
the money?
yeah, people really like, wait, if they've done Horizon and stuff, and
Right.
like these guys know what they're doing, so this is going to work out.
Right.
So it's very much like investing in stock, right? If you invest in Apple, you know you're in safe hands. But if you invest in this new company that came out of nowhere with big
It's
dreams,
more of a risk, right?
it's more of a risk. So that's what people want to know.
Sheesh.
So that's basically where you at the moment. But pre-production is not black and white, and it's like the one of the things that is least scientific in games, because based on my experience, like after doing so many games over so many years, all the pre-productions that I've been part of, they never really yield the results that we wanted in the end. So you're supposed to actually figure out these things. All
This
these
must
things
be a roadmap to how the
Exactly.
game is right.
Absolutely. You're supposed to figure out all of these things in pre-production so everybody feels at peace when you go into production. What happens in reality is that pre-production takes longer than you expected, so you end up going into production while still working in pre-production and figuring things out. And sometimes it goes all the way to pretty much like release. Like you don't know exactly what this character, you don't know what this character does in the narrative, but you need this character in the narrative for some reason. But how do you fit it within the story? But the story is already kind of been told. So how does it? Well, now you have to change the story to fit the character. It's insane. So this is what I mean. Games are not a science. You need to figure things out as you go. It's just like, only at the end the puzzle comes together. But before then is very much like you making the pieces while you putting the puzzle together at the same time.
Man, I'm curious to ask you. I don't want to get you in trouble with any of the past stuff you've done, but
Yeah.
can you think of any, and I won't ask you the converse of this, but like what project were you ever working on where you were like, oh man, this blueprint, this is the map, it's perfectly out. I mean, it's perfect as it can because like you said, it's no exact science. But do you think that perfect map or outline you got contributed to making subsequently the perfect game? Any that come to mind?
I would say only the games that were inspired by previous games.
Okay. Because there was already like a blueprint, like a
Exactly.
template there. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was two of them that come to mind just off the top, which is GoldenEye, the one that with Daniel Craig that came out for the Wii, which was based off the original GoldenEye, and it was basically better graphics, same story, better online. And better mechanics, making sure the odd job doesn't feel OP, things like that. So that game came out really well. We reviewed really well. I think it had a 9 out of 10 or something like that at that time. It was my first game that I was like, everybody was talking about it, which is really cool. Yeah. Exactly. And it was smooth sailing because we just had to look at a game at the previous game. We're like, they did it like this. Where does the cinematic start? Do it. Done.
Damn.
And then the second one was Dead Space. We specifically worked on one called Dead Space Extraction, once again for the Nintendo Wii. Kind of shows my age, but so this game was, once again, Dead Space existed. We know what kind of game Dead Space is. There were a few Dead Space came out already, and this game, the twist of this game is that it was on rails, meaning that I don't know if you guys know about what on rails game means.
No. This is please.
So it basically means that it's almost like going to a roller coaster or to go into a theme park, and when you jump on the little cart,
it just goes up.
Shoot, no, like not even like not roller coaster, but like one of those theme parks like Walt Disney, where Indiana Jones the experience, and you jump on a cart and then you have to either shoot or something.
It's like guided. It's very linear. Like you can't break. It's already on track.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
On rails. Okay.
So that's what it is. And at that point in time, that genre was kind of booming. It no longer exists anymore, but that genre was kind of booming. And this game was like, Dead Space on rails. And it was actually quite good. And once again, reviewed amazingly. And because the way it reviewed amazingly is because you actually have to keep going forward towards the next alien that is in front of you. And then someone, like another alien comes out of your back, or not alien, but like, like the creatures comes out of your back, but you're on rails. So you're like, oh my God. Like, and the pace is very even. It's almost like a Silent Hill, right? You cannot run, and walk. And there's only one door and there's nowhere else for you to go. And you have to go through that door, but you can hear noise. And oh my God, what is behind that door, right? It's kind of that kind of situation. So it was really cool to work on. And once again, it was very well planned out because they already knew what a Dead Space game was. And EA had, I think it was called Volition, the studio that actually worked on that. And they already had it planned out, and then they had to outsource the work of development to a studio. And in this case, it was Eurocom. So we worked on that for a couple, I think it was a year to a year and a half.
That's amazing. Wow. On rails. Learn something new every day.
On rails.
I like the term. Makes total sense now.
Yeah.
I thought you meant more like a roller coaster in the sense of like the loop of the game where it's like it builds up the tension, it's going up, and then at the climax where the bad guy comes out, it's like the adrenaline of going back down. But yours makes more sense.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can still walk. You can control the character. It's just that there's only a path that you can follow. Right?
Got you.
You can stop, you can go back and stuff, but it's just like you have to follow that path. So
it makes total sense. Wow. Okay. All right. So we're moving on now. The narrative, what'd you say? The level and the game director are all like the pre-production phase is like, okay, we got a blueprint like that's good enough. What's the next thing we move into, and like who are the next people hired at this point? You think?
So this is going to be like, the hard grinders, you know what I mean? Like the people that actually put in work. I would say the designers. The But the people that actually make the idea, the vision, a reality, I should say. And this is going to be the animators, going to be the artists, it's going to be the sound people, it's going to be the VFX people, and basically this is the people that actually kind of like make the game, right? So if you think of a game like God of War, right? So most likely I've seen actually like the original pitch for God of War. It was actually in the YouTube video they showcased of the making the God of War, and you can see that Cory Barlog, which is the game director, he had like a big board with big beats of the story, and just like if you guys have seen any Pixar behind the scenes, there's always one scene where the director has a little stick and he goes through the storyboards and be like, and then this happens and then that happens,
right,
and they have to almost say it like as the best storyteller ever, so people are buying into the idea. So Cory Barlog did that, which is the ideation and the before the development, the full development. And then after that, you have to showcase that this thing works. So this is where the things kind of become fuzzy, as I mentioned before, because you can actually develop like so much of the game, like, and think about it and the idea so much that then nothing gets done, which then means that you're telling the animators, we need to create a system, like throwing the axe for God of War, or, like the child that, he has to carry on.
His son. Right.
Atreus and stuff. So, like, how do you actually create the systems to actually sell the story that he says on paper, and then he actually carries his son? Like saying that and then actually doing that in game are two very different things.
Right.
It's hard. It's really hard to actually kind of like do these things. You have to create a system. How do you do it? Do you slow down the character? Do you speed up the character? And what kind of logic do you have? And can the character still be hit? Can it not be hit? If it doesn't get hit, then what happens then? Can he die? Can he not die? Can you use his axe? Can he not? There's so many options that you have to think about. So most studios kind of they overwork that like pre-development area, and then basically then you're stuck with trying to solve these things while you are developing the game, which you probably can hear from my voice that I've been burned many times about this.
Well, yeah, I mean, you shared a couple stories offline. I was yikes. Yeah. Wow. Man, so still working. These people get to the point, they make this vertical slice. If the vertical slice or whatever is greenlit and they proceed, then it moves into, I guess, like more of a fuller kind of big production, right? Like now the clock is ticking. And how is it usually? How is it determined? Like the amount of time that a studio is given to make a game. You know what I'm saying? Like how are some studios given like say 4 years? And then I'm thinking about like the next Mass Effect, for instance. They said they've been working on this for 7 to 9 years at this point. Yeah,
exactly.
At BioWare.
There's a bunch of different factors. Once again, game's not a science. I wish it was, but but yeah, it's a bunch of different factors. So, for example, Mass Effect, like the example that you just gave, they are probably looking at previous games, how long did that took with the tech that they had at the time and the amount of people that they had at the time, how much did it cost and how long did it took, and how long the same thing will actually be like today, right? So now you have a one-to-one. Most likely inflation and all these other things is going to be more expensive.
Right.
But then the question starts coming up, like, do you need as many people with the tech that we have now? Probably not. Tech is better, right? Do we need to tell a bigger story? Maybe, because it's a sequel. People may be expecting more. Do we need more characters? Maybe it's not just the one, or like I think you had a male and female on Mass Effect. Maybe it's just not male and female. Maybe now you can play as an alien. Maybe you can play as different characters. Maybe there's like variations in the story. So there's a bunch of different things that kind of take effect. And then once you answer those questions, then you start answering the question of like, how many people do we realistically need to kind of create the design and the animations and the art and the sound effects and the sound design and all these other things. So you can start to see, if you want to tell a story on Mass Effect, which is already a big game, or used to be, that is bigger and bolder and better in every single way, you probably need a bigger, better, bolder team than ever in every single way as well. Which means that you actually need more money. You also need more time. If the previous game took 3 years, 4 years to make with the tech that I had at the time, most likely this might take a little bit longer. I don't know if it's going to be double time. Depends on how many people you throw at it, but also depends on how organized you are, right? Once again, this is why this time before development becomes crucial. And this is also why here at Proxima, we try to be as organized as possible so we don't waste time trying to figure out things while we're making the game, right?
Is it a big factor too? I was thinking about this because this is one of the other things I've heard about the next Mass Effect, that there were rumors that they were going to wait until PS6 comes out. Now, mind you, I've heard that the next PlayStation is slated to possibly be 2027.
Yeah.
So I'm like, imagine being the team working on this. If you hear that, does that excite you? Like, oh, this is going to be potentially like part of a launch of the next system? Or does that make you like nervous? Like, oh my God, we've been iterating so much on like using this engine. Yeah. Now we have to factor in doing something for some shit that's not even out yet. Like,
yeah, that is a great question, man. So here's the thing. When it comes to production in games, and we don't talk about this enough, and it's a huge factor. Like after a certain amount of a certain point in time, let's say we're actually developing for 2 years now, right? And things are kind of picking up and things are going well. You need to start locking down software that you are using and not upgrading it. So if you're using Unreal 4, let's say, we're in Unreal 5 right
using
now,
Unreal 4.
You need to use Unreal 4 as possible, because if anybody, and this is happening more and more, unfortunately, if anybody decides let's use Unreal 5 now, the jump, even though Epic does a really good job at trying to kind of like bridge that gap as much as possible, but the change is so huge given all the new tooling and all that stuff that it's almost like you have to redo the game from scratch again.
Oh my God.
But you have the assets, but the assets don't fit. It's almost like you're trying to rework a puzzle with more pieces, but needs to look the same. It's really weird. And it's like every developer dreads this. So developing for a new console is that plus 10. It's like even more, because what you're trying to do, developing for a brand new console that nobody actually has developed before, is while you're developing, so two things happen. First, Sony or Microsoft that are developing the consoles, they need feedback on their consoles, because developing the console for the console needs to be as easy as possible, so as many developers kind of like want to develop for the console. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, totally.
Yeah. So PS2, PS3, PS2, I think. Oh no, is it PS2 or PS3? Maybe PS2. No, PS3.
You've been doing this too long. You can't even keep up.
Sorry, guys, but yeah, it was PS2 time. PS2 was the chubby one, right? Like. Was it the chubby one, the PS3?
Yes.
Well, okay, cool. So, that console specifically actually was the one that actually changed developers' minds, because all consoles before then, they used to actually have there'd be a mini PC, right? And Sony got really fancy with PS3, and they actually developed their own CPU and their own architecture and all that stuff. What that did for the PS3, and even though it was a brilliant console, is that everybody had to rethink how they develop games for one specific console, and then they had to develop in a completely different way. I think it was like Xbox 360 at the same time, I believe, to develop for the Xbox 360. So if you wanted to develop for both, which most developers want to, so you can get, you know, the most bang for buck,
Right.
you kind of have to develop two games separately at the same time, and like you have to have a team on this game and a team on that game because the architecture is different and stuff like that. So you can imagine the amount of headache that you have with developing. So since the PS4 times, now everything is like a mini PC. So it's much easier for you to kind of like develop for one and then publish on both consoles now. So that feedback is really important for the Sonys and Microsofts of the world, which from the publisher side. So we then have dev kits. We call it dev kits. It's like this. Like if the PlayStation is like this big, the dev kit is like this big. It's like a box, a black box. That is huge. I have one somewhere. But you use it, you give feedback, and then like, you know, Sony goes like, cool, let's change this, all that stuff. And then you also have to develop the game. And then sometimes Sony goes, we updated this stuff, so now you have to redo certain things. So you now have to redo those things for the console because it's a new platform, and I know everybody's trying to figure out how this works. And then basically you just keep on going in circles like that while you're trying to figure out all the stuff that I mentioned before. You try to figure out that stuff, and at the same time you're trying to figure out how to actually make the game as look as good as possible in a console that nobody knows how to make games look good, right? So then you probably know this, Kyle, but you have games that are like the native games that come out and when the console it comes out, they look absolutely amazing. And then you have games that look kind of like, right? It's like, why are you releasing in this new console?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Most likely they were probably trying to figure out, and we're like, are we just going to develop the game as we have been before, and we're going to put it on the next console? So that's kind of how it is.
Wow. And who, okay, so you just talking about that. I didn't even think about that. Yet another thing to think about. It's like, when you're doing stuff that's going to come out on multiple platforms like Nintendo, Xbox, or, you know, Microsoft, Sony, who's in charge of that? Is there like a certain director whose job it is to make sure like the Nintendo stuff is right versus the same person who oversees all the platforms, or is there a team specifically working on this console versus that console?
Well, like, so there's this thing that is called porting.
Okay.
So things have been changing yet again. And the way it used to work is, I think, how people think of it nowadays, but it no longer works that way anymore. So the way it used to work is that the team itself internally has to have some type of QA and like team specifically with coders that basically are like, let's say you actually publishing to 3 consoles, right? Like, let's say like it's like Steam Deck, even though it didn't exist like that, the Steam Deck and also Steam, and also PlayStation and Xbox. So you would have everybody develops the game. They're all mini PCs anyways. So you develop the game, develop. Everything is high res. Everything is like super expensive. Everything is like super big. Nothing. It will take you like about 3 days to download the game. But then these teams kind of like jump in. Well, I used to jump in, and then they start improving things and giving feedback to the team about, oh, the animations are taking too much memory, or the animations are being too heavy, or you need to reduce the amount of animations in order to fit on a disc for the PlayStation 3, right? So then you have to then rework things and start to kind of like cram things in and take things out and stuff. So that's part of the equation. So you can think about a game as grandiose as possible, and you can have as much planning as possible. You can have the most resources possible, but at least back in the day, games still need to fit in the disc that is 50 gigs, and you need to actually make it work. And as soon as people put the disc before the internet, the game had to work. The game had to work. So you had to really work hard to make sure that, like, as grandiose of the idea you had to fit in that 50 gig disc or 20 gig back in the day. So that's basically what used to happen. Now, games are too big and there's too much work to do, so you outsource those things. So now the main team is actually doing the work of creating this game, and you're not thinking about memory, you're not thinking about stuff until you're about 3 months to 6 months before release, and then you start kind of like optimizing the game, as we will call it, right? You do as best as you possibly can within the team, right, to make sure that the game is shippable. But then if you have Xbox and PlayStation and all the other platforms, normally you develop for the main platform, which is normally PC. So Steam is taken care of Cool.
Right.
But then you outsource the build for the Xbox. You outsource the build for PlayStation. You outsource the build for Steam Deck.
Okay.
And then a separate studio that focuses on porting. That's what they call it. They actually then optimize the game specifically for the PlayStation, or maybe they can do multiple consoles, so they can do maybe many consoles. But the idea being that you need to then change that game to then work as good as possible and optimal as possible for PlayStation. That comes with a lot of responsibility, because there's these things that we call certification. And certification, I talked about it here before in the podcast, but it's these books that are like a Bible that Sony has, Microsoft has, they've been building over the years.
And each one has its own certifications, right?
Completely separate. You need to make sure that those teams that are doing the porting, they are meeting all the criteria. So it's very much like being a lawyer or a judge. You need to read all paperwork that has been, all the evidence need to be there, and needs to all match up and needs to make sense. And if something doesn't really fit, or if there's a bug that actually kind of makes the game crash at some point and is repeatable, they send the thing back, and now you have to fix it, and it costs so much money to submit it to certification.
Every time you submit it, you have to pay the same a fee.
Yeah, and he's like,
that's crazy.
So much money. It's like hundreds of thousands. It's crazy money. Yeah.
What?
Yep.
Yo, it is a wonder a game gets made, considering all these things that you just. I mean, it's literally, wow.
It's a lot. And the reason why they charge so much is so they don't constantly.
It kind of forces you to be, because this is not like something like, oh, it only costs $50.
Submit it forever. But yeah, so they need to make sure that they basically got their stuff together before they submit. And if they submit again, well, you have to pay the price.
I wonder if there's ever been a studio that like ran out of budget submitting for like. I'm sure they would probably just have to go back to the publisher and be like, look, we're there. We just need the money to get this last. Or I'm sure is that factored into the overall budget too? Like when a game, okay.
Yeah. So there's an allocated budget for the certification.
That is, dude. Like this is pulling back the curtain. I'm literally like,
it's I'm glad. Like what's funny is that I actually. I started my career being QA certification for Microsoft, Xbox Live specifically, when Xbox Live started, like the very first, the beginning of online gaming. So I was there, and the amount of games that we pushed back because of bugs that we could replicate. And genuinely, we had to find bugs that we could replicate all the time, because that's the name of the game. Like you have to try to break the game in order to make sure you install it. If you cannot break it, then great, it's done.
Right.
But the amount of games I sent back was like, not we as a team sent back, it was insane. And then years later is when I became aware of how much money each studio had to pay to submit those games. So all the Halos and Knights of the Old Republic and all these other games that I tested back then that sometimes we had to send back. I'm like, man, crazy.
Wow, I'm sure it just gives you another perspective. Like, holy shit! So even for like, Worship Jolly Roger, I can't even imagine that, because that's way down the line. Yeah. But when we're at the point where we're submitting for certification, we better know, like, yo, this shit better be unbreakable, because the money that could potentially that's crazy.
Absolutely. So, like, we most likely will publish on Steam first, PC.
Okay.
The beauty of Steam is that, like, the certification process is like virtually none. There's a few things that you have to make sure that the specs need to be right, the game needs to run. Like, Steam Deck right now is optional, might not be in the future. I don't know, but yeah, like it's kind of like it's cool. Like this is why there's so many indie devs like developing on Steam and stuff, because the barrier of friction to get into the gamers to play your game is so little. But yeah, if you actually want to publish in consoles, you really have to think twice. However, there's always deals to be had. Like if you actually manage to score a Sony exclusive or Xbox exclusive or something like that, maybe they actually kind of like bundle that into the deal and things like that. That's all kinds of stuff that you can do.
Sheesh, man. Yeah. All right, well, let's just keep moving down the pipeline. So, we've been iterating, and maybe a couple years have gone by, and everything is going good. Because I always hear about the dreaded crunch.
Yeah.
When it almost seems inevitable, because you said like you've been on projects where everything was planned out really well, but it's like it just rears its ugly head, I guess, at some point.
Yeah.
When does that usually happen? Like, how close to the finish line? Is crunch usually something that, like, okay, we're like 6 months or a year out, we got to put in that extra time, we got to crunch?
No, like, unfortunately, it's not like that.
Okay.
I wish.
Well, good. Please clear it up and let me know.
Absolutely. So, like if it was optional, like you mentioned just now, it would be so cool, because then everybody would do it, and then like it's great. Like the only time that I had it as optional, which major kudos to EA Dice in Sweden, and I think it's mostly to do with also being Sweden, because the Swedish culture in companies and stuff, they cannot force like workers to do anything. They
really value the work-life balance stuff.
100%. So basically, they asked us very nicely to kind of like work a little extra for about 2 or 3 months for Battlefield 5. And to me, because I come from the UK and I was so used to crunch, I'm like, and we were getting like, I think it was triple pay or something like that, like for like the month or two or something. And I'm like, ka-ching, let's do this. Like, I'm used to this, right? I'm just used to just getting paid either regularly or not getting paid. So it's great.
Wow, that's awesome.
So everybody would do it if it was optional. The problem comes with crunch is when it's not optional, because what happens is during development, lots of things change. Once again, I wish it was the science to make games, but it's not, and lots of things can change. It can be from, I don't know, a publisher that is like willing to publish a game, asking for too many changes while the game is being developed, and now you're behind. Like what you thought you were going to be 6 months from now, you actually, instead of like, being 6 months ahead, you're 6 months behind. Or it could be like, you found problems in the pipeline and a system they wanted to build did not work, and you're 100% sure it was going to work because you made a game previously that had that system, but it doesn't fit. So now you have to rework the system. How long does it take? 6 months, and it takes about 20 people to actually make this thing work. It can be all kinds of stuff that happen during development that then throw things off balance. But at some point in time, developers are doing developers are doing this less and less in publishers as well. They promise the game to release, so everybody knows about Cyberpunk is the biggest example. Like, I feel for them because they are amazing people, but like they promised the game on a specific date, right?
And so they already had it on the calendar and everything. So it's like all working towards this date.
And when they first announced it with the teaser, it was like 7 years ahead. So even gamers were like, plenty of time, it's fine, it's gonna work out. But like when you promise that, and then you have the pressure of the looming date coming towards you, but you start to see that things are not working for whatever reason, things kind of like start slipping, then the pressure starts mounting. And then CD Projekt Red is a really brilliant studio where I know that the founders actually didn't want to actually do any crunch, and they even said it after when some bad news come out that people were crunching too much and stuff. They kind of went, I think it was the founder or one of the founders went like, "I'm sorry, it's on me. I like the project was mismanaged in certain places and things," but eventually you have a bunch of different promises that you have to fulfill, right? Especially in a game of that caliber. So most likely, Microsoft is waiting for the game to release a specific edition of the Xbox console, a controller. Sony is expecting it because they want to maybe have the game before, maybe 2 weeks before, so they play for the exclusivity to actually be first on PlayStation. Do you remember that? First on PlayStation?
Yes, that was like a big deal.
Exactly. So maybe they paid extra for that. So now they had maybe, until July.
It was like a 6-month exclusivity thing or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they had until July to polish the game, but now they have more money, so they actually now have less 6 months because more. It can be a number of things, and I'm just assuming here, but basically all of these things then add pressure to delivering a product, right? And then the bigger the studio, the more variables there is, and then what happens with when there's too many variables and too many people is that like the department, especially production, which normally makes the game afloat and kind of like directs where people want to go, they need to start putting pressure because things are kind of falling off the wagon left, right, and center, right? So the more things fall off the wagon right, left, right, and center, the more production and everybody else needs to start putting pressure on, like, guys, we need to actually deliver this as much as possible. And then big wigs kind of like start coming in as well. Like, you promised this, you did this, I thought this was better, this is not polished here, this is breaking here and stuff. We tested the game is nothing like where it was supposed to be. So now you're feeling more and more pressure, and the inevitable outcome is that then eventually companies go, everybody crunches for the next 3 months. So everybody crunches for the next 6 months is the only viable way for us to deliver the game on time.
And that's not even guaranteed. Like you said, like EA, DICE, they had triple pay. They were nice about it at least, but some companies just say, like, just do it.
You have to do it. And
you're contractually bound to, like.
Exactly. And like, to me, I had it as bad. And that was the worst crunch that I've had. And like, I was there for 2 years and I had to leave. And that was one of the main reasons, just because this company forced everybody to crunch. And this was like early 2000s, but they forced everybody to crunch. But the problem is that a game is not made, like, things don't come at the same time. Like, so animation is done its job. There's a pipeline. Like, if you think about a pipeline, I'm almost like being a linear thing. It starts with design, and then animation is halfway, more or less in the middle, and it finishes more or less with audio, right? As you know, Kyle. Right. So it finishes with audio. So if you think about it in that way, by the time animations are done, you should be able to actually go off home and not crunch while audio maybe is crunching, right? But you know, there's like waves of crunch. Design maybe has to crunch a bunch to make sure that the design is finished and ready for the rest of the pipeline. Animations need to do it to make sure that all the animations are in the game. Audio needs to do it because they're at the end of the pipeline. The game sounds great. But what companies used to do, at least back then, is that if one person crunches, everybody crunches. So then you're just there doing nothing because your job is done.
It's just like for the uniformity, or like, hey, everyone's doing it. Like, wow.
Yeah. That's it. So, and then the only thing they say is like, oh, but we'll get free food, pizza every day. And then you're there until like 12 p.m.
That sucks. I mean, but I get it. It's like, hey, take one for the team. Everyone's doing it in solidarity. But people who have kids, families, other responsibilities.
Like, it got so bad towards the end because of the pressure. This company no longer exists, by the way. Shall not be named, but it no longer exists. But, but it got so bad that if you actually wanted to take holidays, they like limit the amount of holidays that you had. Like, you had to take like 1 or 2 holidays, but they could not be together. You could have to take one week here, another week 2 months later. And towards the end, they would say you cannot like be further away from the office than a certain distance when you take holidays. Meaning,
just in case we need you or something.
Yeah. Meaning, like, don't fly anywhere, don't go anywhere, stay put where you are, because we might need you, might call you back.
Did that ever happen when one of the times you took off where people were like, hey, Harvey, we need you? Oh, and you were probably like, I got to get the F out of here.
I basically, it was actually like when I met my girlfriend at that point, it was now my wife. It was her birthday, and I worked my ass off for months, and I did everything and stuff. Everything was good. Everybody was like, you're doing a good job. All no problems. I said, I want 1 week off in July to actually go and celebrate the birthday with my girlfriend and stuff in France and all that stuff. They told me France is too far. You cannot go. You're not allowed to go. You know, like, so what happens if I go? Well, like, you may or may not have a job. and then I just went. And I came back. I still had a job, and it was all good. But like, that's the kind of fear that you have because, you know, the games industry is small, man, and you don't want to actually kind of like mess up your opportunity. That was my first gig as well that I got in the industry. So
right. So yeah, you felt like, oh my God, like, damn, man, that's wow. Okay, so we made it through crunch.
Yep.
We're at the point now.
Survive crunch.
Survive crunch. Tell me about, like, we're at the point now where we're about to release. How is it leading up? Like, share how it is like a week out from the game actually coming out. Like, what's happening that week before the game comes out or is made commercially available?
So there's two sides to this story here. Things
Okay.
kind of fork a little bit.
Okay.
So one side is like, let's say the game was like really well planned and like everything was great, and like, wait, should I start with the positive or negatives, Kyle?
Start with the negatives. Let's
With
go
the
to the
negative,
negatives
okay.
and then go to
Well,
positives.
let's say this game actually was horribly planned and everything went to horrible, and then everybody's stressed out and it's like the worst production that you have been, and it's one of those stories that I just mentioned before that you just like you cannot wait to find another job. So a week out from like the game being released, maybe a month before and stuff like that, what happens is, and people know about this, is like max exodus. So people start leaving the company in droves, like lots and lots and lots of people start kind of like going to other places, because what makes you go through crunch is to have that game in your resume, to have the game in your CV.
And now that the game is about to come out, it's like,
And now that you're certified, I cannot take this anymore. I'm gone, right? So
wow.
that's basically what happens. And then also what happens, actually, I'm just going to talk about the week before. So like on the positive end, let's say a game is really well planned and everything is cool and the team is gelled and is amazing and it's very much like Proxima, right?
Right, right.
So, so if that happens, what happens is that a week before, everybody's trying to cram in and polish as many things as possible, because you start like about 3 months before, you start to sense the potential of the game. Like games are weird in a way that only at the end is when things make sense, and it's only in the end when you can see how good or how bad the game is. It's kind of weird, like with books and music and anything, like halfway through more or less you'll be like, I have something
Yeah,
here.
yeah, you can
Right.
kind of see the big picture, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Halfway through, you're like, yeah, I have something. Let's keep going. And it motivates you to get to the end. Games normally are in a broken state or like unfinished state up to about 3 or 6 months before. And then things
Wow.
start like coming together like a Voltron. It's really beautiful. So about 2 weeks before, maybe a month before, you kind of start to go like, man, this is going to be special. And you're excited. And you're like, yeah, like if I was doing animations, there's only like these animations that I want to polish. Or if I'm doing VFX, it's like, I know we can actually make these VFX better. Audio, same thing. Like if I can actually just make it like Dolby Atmos, let's make it
Right,
Dolby
right, right,
Atmos.
right.
We have time to make it
Right.
Dolby Atmos.
Right, right.
So you are hyped because you just want to like give it all and make sure that you gave it all, to make sure that when the game comes out and you are anxious for that review from IGN, it comes out and it's a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. And you kind of go, I knew it. This was special, right?
Right.
That's kind of like what happens. And I definitely prefer to be in the second camp, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the way people always talk about that, like even reading about like when companies are looking for people, it's like make sure you ship this amount of games or that amount of games, and I think is that really what it. I don't want to say all it boils down to, but I guess it does, because that's what all your work culminates in, is shipping this game, making sure it gets out.
Yeah, 100%. And what's funny is like when I first started, and I think it's still true nowadays, every publisher, every game, every like developer always says we need somebody that has published at least 3 games or 3 triple
Yeah.
A games, or
Yeah,
like at
yes,
least one
yes.
triple A and like, a couple of indies or something.
Right.
But when you're just getting started and you just have like, let's say, kick-ass showreel portfolio, and you're talented, how can you get the 3 games published? Like,
Right. All you've done is maybe some game jams and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But like,
So you just have to cross your fingers, right? But like, it's basically what most companies ask, and it's almost like a filtering system, right? So basically, only people with experience can actually submit. But
right.
don't be deterred by it, because like most companies actually look at everybody's showreel, or they look at the talented people and they actually want them in their studio. So
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow, man, I've learned a lot. Like,
Yeah?
yeah. I mean, yeah. It's always like just having these conversations with you is awesome. Not only for me and edifying for me, but I know for a fact, like I've had friends and people who listen to the show, and it's like I did not know.
Yeah.
Like you all gave perspective, and it made me not like want to curse out this company for not making this game, because like now I understand all the stuff that is involved in making a game, man. It's like you said, it's crazy, because you said up until almost 3 to 6 months out, you don't know if all the stuff you've been doing for years is gonna like all these puzzle pieces are gonna fit.
No, you really don't. Like,
So
and
it
all
is.
developers feel the same way. Yeah,
It's a crapshoot almost, like it seems to a
100%.
degree.
Yeah,
Wow.
like if you're doing a new IP, that's how it is. If you're doing like something that is just like Hitman 3 or something like that, then maybe
Right.
where you're going, right? But
Right.
like if you're doing like at least for us, like in Battlefield or Star Wars Battlefront, it's like those like radical ideas and stuff. We're like,
Right.
I don't know if this is gonna stick and players are gonna like it, and then you
Right.
release it, and you're gonna like cross your fingers and hopefully is for the best.
Wow.
But yeah, man, like the way I see it is like, and I don't know, this is not going to change anybody's mind. Maybe one or two out there, fingers crossed. But no matter how crap the game is, know that the developers actually tried their best to make it the best game possible.
There was work put in to make whatever you're playing. You know?
Like no game that has come out. Doesn't matter if it's like Gollum that came out recently, or like this is the worst game ever and stuff.
Right.
And stuff. Like it doesn't matter if it's Gollum. Doesn't matter if it's like Naughty Dog or whatever it is. Like the feeling and the sentiment originally when the IP, like when going back to the beginning of our conversation, when the IP, the ideation was actually done. For a publisher or investor to kind of like give so much money for an IP to be made, that idea was really good. that idea, the ideation, all of that stuff, that was solid. Like because they wouldn't spend millions if the idea was not solid. It's just that all of the things that we mentioned here in this podcast just now, something went wrong at some point, and then it went more wrong, and it just continued to go wrong until the game came out. And at some point, somebody said, whatever it takes, this game needs to come out in this date. I don't care how it comes out, it needs to come out. And then it comes out, or it gets canceled. One of those two. But nobody wants a bad game. That's basically, so please, like I feel for all my fellow developers whenever a bad game comes out, I never feel like this game is shit. Never that. Like
because work was put into it. There was sweat equity put in.
Always.
Yeah. Always. I guess just last thing I'll say is like just kind of a way to analogize it is almost like everyone's running this big race, right? And then, some people, someone's going to get to the finish line and cross first, and that's like again the games that maybe get a 9 out of 10, but then obviously it's inevitable. Some people got to finish last, but they still finished. It's just that maybe it wasn't like the same kind of adulation and the prestige is not there because they didn't finish first or get a good review and the game wasn't great.
100%, Kyle, 100%. Yeah. And I think like what you mentioned just now about finishing the game, that's like, even if it's a bad game, that's a massive, like now, right, Kyle? Like after doing this for like
we are nowhere near finishing.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're just trying to finish our slice. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But like if Jolly Roger comes out, right, and even if he's badly reviewed, at least we've done it. We actually worked hard.
No, you're right. You're right.
You know what I mean? Like at least
you can't take that away from anyone.
It's like an artist putting in an album and then fans saying this is the worst album ever done.
Right.
Like I doubt Eminem wanted to make a bad album, right? I'm just Eminem because everybody knows him, but I doubt like artists of that caliber ever wants to actually go like, you know what, this album is going to be crap, but the next one is going to be great. So they always start like from this, like this is going to be great, and then sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
Hey, and it's artists. For the most part, subjective, because there are games that a lot of people have shat on that some people love and consider like cult classics and vice versa. There's games that are like everyone loves, and if some people, just because everyone else loves it, they don't want to, so it can be very subjective.
100%.
And if you happen to make that game where you appease both the mainstream and the real gamer independent people, that's like lightning in a bottle.
Completely.
But regardless, work was put in. So
yeah, absolutely. And games like only recently games have been like valued as much as they are right now. Like right now we have classics and Game of the Year, and like when people think about, I don't know, Baldur's Gate, or they think about, I don't know, Hades, right? Oh, what a classic. Like it's amazing. Right. And people really feel it, and it's like, yes, it's amazing. But if you think about like, I don't know, PS1, right? With the blast discs and stuff. I mean, you buy the Tony Hawk, for example, and the disc is all scratched up, and your brothers played it and you played it, and it's like, it's a game.
Right.
And like only now in retrospect is a classic and is amazing, and is like really people put a lot of work into that game and stuff.
Right.
But the people that actually truly appreciated it was actually the developers making it, and it just stuck because it was really cool.
Right.
But back then, in those times, it was like a rodeo. Like some games were great, some games were horrible, and there was nothing in between. It was either good or bad. There was nothing. There was no
you're
more
totally
or less.
right, man. Definitely. It's I as always, man, I appreciate the insight and not only for me, but I get to host and talk to you and get it. But again, I know for a fact that the stuff that we're talking about, people appreciate too, because there's just so much, it's almost like arcane wizardry in science. And like you said, there is no exact science with this stuff. Which is kind of cool because at the end, this is creating art, and sometimes you can have the best intentions, but the what comes out of what's produced might not have been exactly what was intended.
100%. Absolutely. Sometimes it's a Frankenstein, but sometimes, right?
Yes.
It's like butterfly, beautiful, right?
Yeah, no doubt, man.
Oh yeah.
Well, Harvey, thanks for taking us through. As I said at the beginning, soup to nuts, ideation to fruition, like making a game.
I remember that.
And yeah, man, on behalf of Harvey, I'm Kyle Murdock. We make games as much as we love playing them. And we do this for y'all, for the players. Peace.
Peace.